In the open source world, what we're striving for is compliance, of course. That's the name of the presentation. But it's also extremely important to understand that compliance is not about perfection. It's about risk reduction. I think it's probably safe to say that there's almost no organization of any meaningful size that is completely compliant with their open source obligations. But what companies should strive to do is to come to an optimal level of compliance, be a good citizen in the open source world, and manage their risk, but accepting the idea that there will be some risk and that perfect compliance may not be possible. A lot of clients ask, do I need an open source policy? And I think the answer to that question today is yes, and you probably need a written open source policy. The worst thing possible is to have a written policy that everyone ignores. That will actually probably increase any risk that you might have for, say, shareholder derivative suits or looking bad in some kind of eventual enforcement action. The best thing to have is a policy, written or not, that people enforce and that is sensible and manages your risk in a livable way. As I mentioned before, it may not be possible to be perfectly compliant, but you should be as compliant as you can within the resources that you have. The policy really needs to be tailored to fit the organization. Written open source policies range from very formal to very informal. I think they should all be easily understood by engineers who have to follow them, and so I am very much in favor of a plain language approach. And a policy that says you can't use open source unless you get legal's permission, that's not going to be useful because everybody's going to ignore it. You need to think about what your engineers can do without asking permission, what they need to ask permission for. And then you need to educate them about the things that they don't have to ask permission for so that they can make intelligent choices about that need. But generally, what you might want to include in a policy is what kind of open source people can use with or without approval. Usually companies stratify that based on the license that covers the open source, but sometimes they want to do it project by project, or sometimes they want to divide it into technology areas, whatever works for the business. And if you're going to stratify it by licenses, then you'll probably have an approved license list. A lot of companies do a black, white, gray list or stop, go, caution list. If you intend to engage in code scanning, you need to figure out what your policies are for that as well. If you're going to use open source software, you need to print out and retain the license information. You might think that you can always find that by going back, but that's not always true. Sometimes projects die, they get relicensed under other terms, and if that happens, you might actually have some difficulty backtracking. That's a use for the Wayback Machine. And documenting all changes to open source modules. This is good programming practice, good business practice, and also is required by some of the licenses. So if I get a package of open source code I'm going to use, but I decide I want to tweak it for my own use, of course I have the right to do that because it's open source, but I really need to notate that somewhere, because otherwise what might happen is that the code will be used in its plain vanilla form in the next time an engineer decides that it needs to be used in my product. And so that can cause technical problems. Also, some of the licenses actually require that you document your changes in some form. Okay, how does it help your company stay compliant? This is more suggestions. Don't change or eliminate existing comments in the headers. Stripping copyright notices out, stripping licensing terms out, stripping indications of who changed something in a header file is something that most engineers know they shouldn't do. It's not good programming practice to do it, but from a legal point of view it also causes problems. You should avoid renaming open source modules. Each module will have a name, and renaming them can cause difficulty finding the license terms again if you didn't capture them when you first got them, and also it will just cause technical problems. Engineers should not be contributing to open source projects unless they have a clear understanding with their company about when they can and cannot do that. The picture here is a little coin because it's like render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. If you work for a company, you should be complying with their open source policies when you contribute code to third-party projects. It can affect the IP rights of your company. And it's important to understand that our interests are aligned between the lawyers and the engineers because good programming practices are also best legal practices. Clean integration, modularity, minimization of data sharing, transparent APIs. I'm talking here about some of the compliance requirements that apply to GPL and LGPL. Modular programming actually helps with legal compliance. If you find a problem, okay, it's all this stuff about finding problems, code scanning, policies, etc. But if you have a problem, what can you do? Well, the most obvious thing is to stop using the code or rewrite your code. But before you take drastic measures like that, you should consider that there may be many ways to remediate open source problems. And they basically fall into four categories: remove, replace, re-engineer, and relicense.